I am Samuel, 36 years old, and the night I destroyed my marriage started with the clink of silverware on fine china and ended with the sound of a slap that echoed like a gunshot. Before I tell you how I brought down a multimillion-dollar empire with a single sentence and walked away from the woman I thought was the love of my life, let me know where you guys are watching from in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks before the incident, when the first crack really started to show. But to understand why I did what I did, you have to understand who I am when I'm not at home. I work as a senior aerospace engineer at a facility just outside of Seattle. Sounds fancy, but my day-to-day is actually pretty quiet. I spend my life looking at screens, monitoring telemetry data for communication satellites. My job is to make sure that when you pick up your phone to call your mom in Florida, or when a rescue team needs GPS coordinates during a hurricane, the signal is there. It's precise work. It's high-stakes work. 1 decimal point off in my calculations, and a piece of equipment worth $300 million turns into space junk. At the office, people call me the surgeon. My boss, Dr. Eris, a man who has been sending metal into orbit since the Apollo days, shakes my hand with a grip that means something. When I speak in meetings, the room goes quiet. People take notes. I am respected. I am competent. I am a man who solves problems that most people don't even know exist. But the moment I clock out and drive my 5-year-old sedan back to the suburbs, I stop being the surgeon. I become Jessica's husband. Or, in the eyes of my in-laws, the one with the boring job. That Tuesday, I came home feeling good. Dr. Eris had pulled me aside to talk about a potential promotion. It was a massive step up, lead project manager for the new DoD contract. It would come with a significant raise, enough that I could finally stop stressing about the mortgage payments that seemed to eat up 70% of my paycheck. I walked through the front door, loosening my tie, ready to share the news. The house was quiet, but the tension was already there. It hung in the air like the smell of burnt toast. "Jessica," I called out. She was in the kitchen, furiously scrubbing a wine glass. Jessica is beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made me stutter the first time we met in college. But over the last 6 years, her beauty had taken on a sharp, brittle edge. She looked up, and there was no smile. "No, how was your day?" "You're late," she said. "It's 6:15, Jess." I stopped for gas. I walked over to kiss her cheek, but she turned away, focusing on a smudge on the crystal. "We have to go to my parents' house for dinner on Sunday. It's the planning meeting for the 40th anniversary party," she said, her voice tight. "And please, Samuel, can you make an effort this time?" I paused, my hand halfway to the refrigerator handle. "Make an effort? Jess, I helped your dad clean his entire garage last Thanksgiving. I drove your mom to her eye surgery when Julian couldn't be bothered. You know what I mean," she snapped, finally setting the glass down. "Don't just sit there in the corner talking about satellites and math. Engage with them. And please, for the love of God, get a new suit. Julian is bringing some important guests, and I don't want you looking like you work in IT support." There it was, the comparison, the name that haunted our marriage like a poltergeist. Julian. Julian is Jessica's older brother. He's 42, has teeth that are too white, a tan that is too orange, and a personality that sucks the oxygen out of every room he enters. He calls himself a real estate mogul. He drives a brand new Lamborghini Urus, posts videos on Instagram about hustle culture, and treats me like I'm his chauffeur. "I'm up for a promotion, Jess," I said quietly, trying to salvage the mood. "A big one. Lead manager." She blinked, looking at me with a vague sort of disinterest. "That's nice, Sam. Does it come with a company car? Or are you still going to be driving that Honda?" "It comes with respect," I said, my voice hardening, "and a salary increase." "Well, good," she sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. "Maybe we can finally redo the kitchen. Julian just dropped 50 grand on a smart home system for his place." "It's incredible, Sam. You walk in and the house greets you. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was exhaustion. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion of constantly running a race I didn't sign up for, against a guy who was cheating. "I'm sure it's great," I muttered. "He's bringing Mr. Sterling to the anniversary party." Jessica dropped the bomb casually. I froze. Sterling? As in Charles Sterling? The billionaire investor. "Yes," Jessica beamed, her eyes finally lighting up. "Julian convinced him to invest in the new waterfront development. It's huge, Sam. Daddy is so proud. That's why everything has to be perfect. So please, just try to be impressive. Or if you can't be impressive, just be invisible. If you can't be impressive, be invisible." That sentence rattled around in my skull for the next 2 weeks. It was the motto of my marriage. I paid the bills. I fixed the leaky faucets. I handled the lawyer when we had that property line dispute with the neighbor. I did the taxes. I was the foundation. But nobody looks at the foundation. They look at the chandelier. And Julian was the chandelier. Flashy, expensive, and hanging by a very thin thread. Though I didn't know that yet. The night before the party, I was in my home office, a converted guest room that Jessica constantly threatened to turn into a meditation space. Working late, I had a stack of files from work. We were auditing the insurance policies for our upcoming launch. The insurance was backed by a massive pension fund, the State Teachers and First Responders Retirement Trust. This is boring stuff to most people. Actuarial tables, risk assessments, asset allocations. But I like patterns. I find comfort in numbers because numbers don't lie. Numbers don't tell you to be invisible. I was cross-referencing the fund's high-risk investment portfolio when a name popped up on the screen. Mitchell Development Group Holdings, LLC. I blinked. I took a sip of cold coffee and leaned in. Mitchell. That's my wife's maiden name. That's Julian's last name. I started digging. I shouldn't have. It wasn't my department. But curiosity is a curse. I pulled up the filings. The pension fund had allocated $20 million to Julian's company for a mixed-use commercial zone in downtown. I knew that zone. I drove past it every day to work. It was an empty lot full of weeds and a rusty chain-link fence. There was no construction. There were no permits filed. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. Why would a conservative pension fund for teachers invest $20 million in a dirt lot owned by a guy who barely graduated high school? I looked deeper. The collateral for the loan was listed as verified assets from a parent company. I followed the paper trail. It led to a shell company in the Caymans, and then another in Delaware, and finally circling back to a guarantor. Robert Mitchell, my father-in-law. My heart started hammering against my ribs. My father-in-law, Robert, was a retired dentist. He had money, sure. He had a nice house and a golf membership. But he didn't have guarantee a $20 million loan money. Unless I pulled up the property records for Robert's house. Then the vacation cabin. Then his own retirement accounts which, because I did his taxes 2 years ago, I still had access to view in my archived files. They were drained. All of it. Leveraged to the hilt. It wasn't just a bad investment. It was a house of cards. Julian wasn't a genius. He was a parasite. He had drained his parents dry to fake solvency, used that fake solvency to get a massive loan from the pension fund, and was now using the pension money to pay the interest on the loans from his parents' accounts. It was a classic Ponzi structure, but with a twist. He was robbing firefighters and teachers to pay for his Lamborghini. I felt sick. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. Upstairs, my wife was sleeping, dreaming of smart homes and impressing billionaires. She didn't know. Or maybe she did. I closed the laptop. I had a choice. I could stay invisible. I could go to that party, eat the shrimp, smile at the insults, and let the clock run out until the feds knocked on the door. Or I could stand up. If you can't be impressive, be invisible, she had said. Well, I was about to be the most impressive person in the room. To understand why the discovery of that fraud hit me so hard, you have to understand the history. You have to understand the slow, dripping torture of the last 6 years. It wasn't one big fight that ruined us. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. Let me take you back to the barbecue last summer. Memorial Day. The Mitchell family gatherings are always a production. My mother-in-law, Martha, treats a backyard burger flip like a royal coronation. There's a dress code. There's a seating chart. I was at the grill, sweating through my shirt because Julian, who was supposed to be manning the station, had decided it was too hot and went inside to make himself a mojito. I was flipping 20 steaks, trying to get them all medium rare exactly how Robert liked them. Julian walked out onto the patio. He was wearing white linen pants and loafers that cost more than my first car. He had an audience, as always, a couple of cousins and Emily, Jessica's younger sister. "Hey Sam," Julian shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Don't burn them this time, all right? I bought those steaks at a butcher shop in the city. Wagyu. Don't turn them into hockey pucks like you do with your burgers." I gritted my teeth. "They're under control, Julian." He walked over, swirling his drink. He grabbed my wrist, lifting my arm up to look at my watch. It was a Seiko. Reliable, sturdy, practical. A gift from my dad before he passed away. "Look at this," Julian laughed, showing it to the cousins. "Still wearing the ticking time bomb, huh? Sam, buddy, you're an engineer. Get yourself an Apple Watch or a Rolex. That thing looks like something you'd find in a cereal box." The cousins giggled. It was nervous laughter, the kind people make when they know someone is being a jerk but they're too afraid to say it. "My dad gave me this watch," I said, pulling my arm back. "Yeah, well, sentimental value doesn't tell the time any better," Julian scoffed. "You know, if you need a loan to upgrade your style, just ask. I know things are tight for you guys." Things were tight because Jessica had spent $6,000 on a life coaching retreat in Sedona that Julian had recommended. Things were tight because I was putting 15% of my salary into a 401k while paying off Jessica's student loans. I looked over at Jessica. She was sitting by the pool, chatting with her mom. She heard him. I know she heard him. She looked up, saw my face, and just gave a tiny, dismissive wave. A wave that said, "Let it go. Don't make a scene." That was the dynamic. Julian was the golden child. He could do no wrong. He dropped out of college. He's too creative for the academic system. He cheated on his first wife. She didn't understand his drive. He lost 50 grand on a crypto scam. He's a risk taker, a visionary. Me? I was the reliable utility player. I was the one Robert called when his Wi-Fi went down. I was the one Martha called when she needed someone to move furniture. But at the dinner table, I was the punchline. Whatever I achieved, Julian had done something better. I finished my master's degree. Julian just closed a deal worth millions. On paper. I got a safety award at NASA. Julian bought a boat. And then there was Liam. Liam is Emily's husband. He's a tax attorney. Quiet guy, receding hairline, always looks like he's apologizing for existing. We were the outsider club. That same day at the barbecue, after the steak incident, Liam found me cleaning the grill. He handed me a cold beer. "He's in rare form today," Liam muttered, nodding toward the house where Julian was holding court. "He's a prick," I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud to family. Liam looked around nervously, then leaned in. "You know, I looked at some contracts for him last month. For that condo project." "Yeah." I scrubbed the grate harder. "It was weird, Sam. The LLCs were all registered to P.O. boxes in Nevada. And the initial capital, it didn't come from a bank. It came from private equity. But the signatures were messy." "Messy how? Like, desperate?" Liam took a sip of beer. "I tried to tell Emily that maybe we shouldn't invest our kids' college fund in his next round, and she nearly took my head off. She said I was jealous." I stopped scrubbing. "Did you invest?" Liam looked down at his shoes. 10,000. To keep the peace. $10,000. Gone. I knew it then, even before I found the proof later. I looked at Liam. A good man, a father, being bullied into throwing his children's future into a furnace just to avoid an argument. That memory came flooding back to me as I sat in my office at 2 a.m., staring at the evidence of the pension fraud. It wasn't just about Julian being annoying anymore. It wasn't just about him insulting my watch. He was stealing. He was stealing from Liam. He was stealing from Robert and Martha, though they were too blind to see it. And he was stealing from the public. I closed my eyes and thought about my own finances. The arguments over money were constant. Jessica didn't understand why we couldn't just manifest abundance. She didn't understand that wealth comes from work or compounding interest or building something real. She thought wealth was something you claimed like a parking spot. I remembered a fight we had 3 months ago. "Why can't we go to the Maldives with Julian and Elena?" she had screamed. "They invited us. It's embarrassing to say no. Because it costs $12,000, Jess. We have a mortgage. We have to fix the roof. You have no vision." She threw a pillow at me. "You're so scared of everything. That's why you're stuck in middle management while Julian is building an empire." An empire of dirt. I realized, sitting in that dark room, that I wasn't just angry at Julian. I was angry at Jessica. She was an accomplice. Maybe not legally, but morally. She enabled him. She validated him. She worshipped the altar of his fake success and sacrificed our marriage on it. I stood up and paced the small room. My dad used to tell me, "Sam, the truth is like a line of code. It either works or it crashes the whole system. You can't negotiate with gravity." I had been negotiating with gravity for 6 years. I had been trying to pretend that up was down, that rude was funny, that recklessness was ambition. Tomorrow was the party, the 40th anniversary, the big stage. Mr. Sterling would be there. If I spoke up, I would destroy the family. I would humiliate my wife. I would likely end my marriage. But if I stayed silent, I would be part of the fraud. My name was on the compliance checks for the aerospace company. If it came out that I knew or should have known that the pension fund we relied on was compromised by my own brother-in-law, my career would be over. My security clearance would be revoked. I would lose everything I actually worked for. The choice was clear. It was me or him. I went to the closet and pulled out my suit. The IT support suit. I brushed it off. It was clean. It was sharp. It fit me perfectly. I didn't need a new suit. I needed a new life. The morning of the party, the air in our house was brittle enough to snap. Jessica was in a frenzy of preparation, acting as if we were about to meet the Queen of England, not her parents who lived 20 minutes away. "Did you get the haircut?" she asked without looking at me, aggressively fluffing throw pillows that we were leaving behind anyway. "Yes, Jess. I got a trim. And the gift? You remembered the vintage wine. It's in the car." She finally turned to me, scanning me up and down like a drill sergeant inspecting a recruit who was known to be a screw-up. She frowned at my suit, the same charcoal gray one she hated. "I thought I asked you to buy something new," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Dangerous." "I didn't have time," I lied. "Work was crazy. The satellite launch protocols. Always the work," she scoffed. "Fine. Just try to stand in the back during the photos. The shimmer on that fabric looks cheap." I didn't say anything. I just picked up the car keys. "Enjoy the view while you can, Jess," I thought. Because after tonight, the only thing you'll be looking at is a subpoena. The drive to Robert and Martha's estate was silent. Jessica spent the entire ride checking her makeup in the visor mirror and texting Emily. I drove with a strange sense of calm. It's the feeling you get right before you pull the lever on a rocket test. The countdown is over. The physics are set. Whatever happens next is out of your hands. We arrived at the house. It's a sprawling McMansion in a gated community, the kind of place with too many columns and not enough character. The driveway was already filling up with luxury cars. Mercedes, BMWs, a Porsche. And there, taking up 2 spots right in front of the fountain, was the beast. The Lamborghini Urus. Bright, obnoxious yellow. "Oh my God!" Jessica gasped, actually clutching her chest. "He got it. He actually got it. Look at that, Sam. That is success." "It's a car, Jess," I said. putting our Honda into park next to a landscaping truck. "You're just jealous," she snapped. "Don't ruin this." We walked up the driveway. The front door swung open, and there was Julian. He was holding a glass of champagne, wearing a tuxedo with a velvet jacket. He looked like a villain from a bad spy movie. "The B-team has arrived," he roared. Jessica ran up to him and hugged him. "Julian, the car. It's stunning. Custom paint job," he bragged, winking. "Cost more than Sam's annual salary, probably." He looked at me over Jessica's shoulder. His eyes were glassy. He was already drunk or high on his own ego. "Hey Sam, nice suit. Did you borrow it from a funeral director?" "Happy anniversary, Julian," I said, my voice steady. "Where are your parents?" "They're inside with Mr. Sterling." Julian lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The big man is here. Listen, Sam, seriously. Stay out of the way tonight. Sterling is old school. He doesn't want to hear about whatever it is you do. Space toys. He wants to talk business." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. I walked past him into the house. The foyer was decked out in white roses. There must have been $10,000 worth of flowers alone. A string quartet was playing in the corner. Waiters were circulating with trays of caviar blinis. It was disgusting. I knew, from my late-night audit, that Robert had missed a property tax payment on this house last month. I knew that Martha's credit card was maxed out. This entire party was being funded by debt that was ultimately guaranteed by the stolen pension money. I saw Liam standing by the bar, looking miserable. He was nursing a scotch. "Hey," I said, sidling up to him. "Sam," he nodded, looking relieved. "You survived the entry checkpoint?" "Barely. The Lambo is yellow." "It's a lease," Liam whispered. I heard him talking on the phone. A short-term corporate lease. But he's telling everyone he paid cash. "Liam," I looked him in the eye. "Does Emily know about the inheritance trust? The one your grandmother left for the kids?" Liam turned pale. "Why?" "Just check the account on Monday." "Okay. Promise me." Liam stared at me, fear dawning in his eyes. "Sam, what do you know?" "Not here," I said. Just then, a hush fell over the room. Robert and Martha were descending the grand staircase. They looked like royalty. Martha was dripping in diamonds, probably fake or borrowed. Robert looked tired, his smile strained, but he waved regally. And next to them, walking with a cane and an air of absolute authority, was Charles Sterling. He was a legend in the business world. A shark. He was 70 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than my house. He had cold, blue eyes that scanned the room like a radar. Julian rushed over to them. "Ladies and gentlemen, the happy couple, and our honored guest, Mr. Sterling." Applause broke out. Jessica was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. She looked at me, her eyes wide, mouthing, "Smile." I forced a grimace. Mr. Sterling didn't smile. He just nodded. He looked bored. He looked like a man who was used to being the smartest person in the room, and he wasn't impressed by the flowers or the string quartet. The dinner bell rang. We all shuffled into the dining room. The table was set for 20. Name cards were gold embossed. I walked around the table looking for my name. I found it. Far end. Next to the kitchen door. Opposite a cousin's teenage daughter who was wearing headphones. Julian, naturally, was seated at the head of the table, to the right of Mr. Sterling. Jessica was next to Julian. I sat down. The chair was wobbly. Of course it was. This is it, I thought, watching the waiters pour the wine. The Last Supper. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the flash drive I had brought, just in case. But I didn't need the drive. I had the photos on my phone. I had the bank routing numbers memorized. I watched Julian lean in and say something to Mr. Sterling. Sterling frowned, looking slightly annoyed. Julian laughed, too loud. The storm was gathering. The pressure in the room was dropping. I took a sip of water. I needed to be sober for this. The first course was lobster bisque. It was rich, creamy, and tasted like ash in my mouth. The conversation at the power end of the table was dominating the room. Julian was holding court, his voice booming. "You see, Charles," Julian said, dropping the first name as if they were old golf buddies. "The key to this development isn't just the location. It's the synergy. We're bringing in tech companies. We're bringing in high-end retail. It's going to be the Silicon Valley of the suburbs." Mr. Sterling took a slow spoonful of soup. "And the capital structure? You mentioned you secured the bridge loan." "Done deal." Julian waved his hand dismissively. "Fully funded. My partners are silent, but very deep-pocketed. We're oversubscribed, actually. I had to turn people away. I choked on my water. Oversubscribed. He was looting a pension fund. "Sam, you okay down there?" Julian called out. "Soup too spicy for you? I know you like things bland." The table chuckled. Jessica didn't look at me. She was staring at Julian with adoration. "I'm fine, Julian," I said, wiping my mouth. "Just thinking about synergy." "Don't hurt your brain," Julian smirked. "So, as I was saying, Charles." The dinner dragged on. The filet mignon arrived. The wine flowed. Julian got louder and redder. He started roasting people. It was his favorite pastime. He made a joke about Cousin Sarah's weight. He made a joke about Liam's receding hairline. And then, inevitably, he turned his sights on me. "You know, everyone—" Julian stood up, tapping his glass with a fork. "I want to propose a toast. To Mom and Dad. 40 years. That's an achievement." "Here, here," everyone murmured. "And," Julian continued, his eyes locking onto me, "I want to give a special shout-out to my sister Jessica, for sticking it out. You know, they say marriage is hard. But it's especially hard when you're the one carrying the dead weight." The room went deadly silent. This wasn't a joke. This was an execution. "Julian," Robert said softly, "sit down." "No, Dad. I'm serious," Julian slurred slightly. "I mean, look at Sam. He's a nice guy. He's serviceable. But come on. Jessica Mitchell deserves a king, not a serf. I tried to tell her 6 years ago. I said, 'Jess, this guy is a Honda Civic. You need a Ferrari.' But she wouldn't listen." He laughed. Cruel, wet sound. "And look where we are. Sam is still pushing papers at that government job. Still driving that junker. While I'm about to change the skyline of the city. Jess, seriously. It's never too late to upgrade. I've got a friend, a developer from Miami, coming into town next week. Single. Rich. Just saying." My blood ran cold. He was suggesting, openly, in front of our entire family and a business investor, that my wife should leave me for his friend. I looked at Jessica. This was the moment. The payoff moment. The moment she would slam her hand on the table and defend her husband. The moment she would say, "Shut up, Julian. Sam is 10 times the man you are." I waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Jessica looked down at her plate. She picked up her wine glass and took a long, shaky sip. She said nothing. She said nothing. That silence broke something inside me. It wasn't my heart. That had been cracked for a long time. It was my restraint. The chain that held the surgeon back snapped. I looked at Mr. Sterling. He was watching the scene with a look of distaste. He wasn't disgusted by me. He was disgusted by Julian's lack of class. But he didn't know the half of it. "Julian," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a laser. "Oh, the Civic speaks," Julian mocked, cupping his ear. "What's that, engine trouble?" "I think you should sit down," I said, pushing my chair back, "before you say something that sends you to federal prison." "Excuse me?" Julian dropped the smile. His face contorted into a mask of aggression. "What did you say to me, you little worm?" I said. I stood up slowly. I adjusted my cuffs. I felt incredibly calm. "That your partners aren't deep-pocketed. They are the state teachers' retirement trust. And they didn't invest. You forged the collateral documents using your father's drained retirement accounts to secure a fraudulent loan." The air left the room. It was as if I had opened the airlock on a spaceship. "Sam!" Jessica hissed, grabbing my arm. "Sit down. You're drunk." "I haven't had a drop, Jess." I shook her hand off. I walked toward the head of the table. Julian looked confused, then angry. "You're crazy. Dad, call security. Get this lunatic out of here." "I have the files, Julian," I said, stopping right next to Mr. Sterling. I didn't look at Julian. I looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, do you check your email on the weekends?" Sterling looked at me, intrigued. "I do. I just sent you a PDF," I said. "It contains the routing numbers for the $20 million that was supposedly transferred to the Mitchell Development Group. If you look at page 4, you'll see the funds were immediately wired to Apex Holdings in the Caymans, and then funneled back to pay off the personal debts of Julian Mitchell, including the lease on the yellow Lamborghini outside." Sterling pulled out his phone. The room was frozen. Julian lunged. "Don't look at that. He's lying. He's a jealous, low-level engineer who doesn't know how business works." Sterling held up a hand. One hand, and Julian stopped dead. Sterling scrolled. His eyes narrowed. He swiped. He zoomed in. Then he slowly placed the phone on the table. He looked at Julian. The look was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was the look a butcher gives a piece of meat. "Julian," Sterling said, his voice ice cold, "is this your signature on the transfer authorization?" It's creative financing, Charles. It's bridge capital. I was going to pay it back once the pre-sales came in." Julian was sweating now. Rivers of it. "You used my name," Sterling said quietly. "You told the pension fund I was a co-guarantor. That's how you got the rate." That is wire fraud," Sterling said. "That is identity theft. And that is stealing from my reputation." Julian turned to his father. "Dad, tell him we're good for it." Robert looked gray. He was clutching his chest. "Julian, you said the accounts were safe. You said it was just a liquidity proof. You signed the papers, Dad." Julian screamed. "You signed them." Pandemonium. Robert slumped in his chair. Martha started screaming. Elena, Julian's wife, stood up and threw her wine glass at him. It shattered against the wall. And then Jessica stood up. I turned to her. I expected shock. I expected horror. I expected her to run to me. Instead, her face was twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. "You bastard!" she screamed at me. I blinked. "What?" "You ruined it!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You ruined the party. You ruined the deal. How could you do this to my family?" "Jess," I said, stunned. "He's a criminal. He was stealing. He was fixing it," she yelled. "He had a plan. You're just jealous because he's successful and you're nothing. You're nothing but a boring, miserable little man." She took a breath, her chest heaving. And then she delivered the ultimatum. "Say sorry to my brother. Right now. Apologize to Julian for making up these lies. Or leave my house. Get out." The room went silent again, waiting for my answer. I looked at Julian, who was trembling, wiping sweat off his forehead. I looked at Sterling, who was watching me with a newfound respect. I looked at Jessica, the woman I had promised to love and cherish. I realized then that she didn't love me. She loved the stability I provided, but she hated the person who provided it. She wanted the criminal's lifestyle with the engineer's safety net. I walked over to Julian. I leaned in close. "I'm not sorry," I whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But you will be. Because I forwarded that email to the FBI Cybercrimes Division 10 minutes ago. That was the sentence. The one that destroyed 3 marriages." Julian's knees gave out. He literally collapsed into his chair. I turned to Jessica. "And for the record," I said, my voice calm, "it's our house. I pay the mortgage. But you can keep it. You're going to need the asset to pay for your brother's legal defense." I took my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. "Happy anniversary," I said to Robert and Martha, and I walked out. Walking out of that house was the hardest and easiest thing I have ever done. My legs felt like lead, but my chest felt lighter than it had in a decade. I could hear the screaming starting up again as I closed the heavy oak front door. Jessica's voice, shrill and panicked. Martha's wailing. And the deep, booming shout of Mr. Sterling on his phone, presumably calling his team of sharks to rip Julian apart before the feds got there. I got into my Honda. I started the engine. I didn't look back. I drove straight to a motel on the interstate. Not a hotel. A motel. I needed to be somewhere anonymous. I needed to be somewhere where nobody knew Jessica's husband. I sat on the lumpy bed, staring at the wall. My phone was vibrating off the hook. Jessica. 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 Robert. Jessica. Unknown number. Probably Julian. I turned it off. I didn't sleep. I just sat there replaying the scene. The look on Julian's face when I mentioned the FBI. The look on Jessica's face when she chose the criminal over the truth. The next morning, I turned my phone on. 74 missed calls. And one voicemail from Liam. Played it. Sam. It's a war zone, man. The cops came. Sterling pressed charges immediately. They took Julian away in cuffs at 11 p.m. Robert is in the hospital, minor heart attack, stress-induced. And Jessica? Look, she's telling everyone you hacked Julian's accounts and planted evidence. She's spinning out, Sam. Get a lawyer. A shark. I'm texting you a number. Call him. Now. I called the number. Lawyer. A guy named Davis. I met him an hour later at a diner. Davis was a short, bald man who looked like a pit bull in a suit. I told him everything. I showed him the files. I showed him the financial records of my contributions to the marriage versus Jessica's spending. Okay, Davis said, stirring his coffee. Here's the good news. You're the whistleblower. You're the hero in the eyes of the law. The bad news? Your wife is going to try to burn you down. We need to file for divorce today, on grounds of irreconcilable differences, and let's throw in financial infidelity on her part, given she was funneling marital assets into her brother's Ponzi scheme. She was. I asked, shocked. We'll find out, Davis winked. Discovery is a beautiful thing. The next few weeks were a blur of chaos. The story broke on the local news, then the national news. Local developer arrested in pension fund scheme. Prominent investor Charles Sterling victim of fraud. There was footage of Julian being led out of the police station. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo anymore. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked small. He looked terrified. The golden child had tarnished. And then the fallout hit the rest of the family. Elena, Julian's wife, filed for divorce 3 days after the arrest. She claimed she knew nothing, which I doubted, but she was smart enough to cut the cord. She took their kids and moved to Aspen. Liam and Emily were next. Liam, emboldened by my exit, finally stood up to Emily. He demanded to see the accounts. When Emily admitted she had given Julian another $50,000 of the kids' college fund just a week before the party, Liam packed a bag. He moved into my motel room for a week before getting his own place. 3 marriages. Gone. But the battle with Jessica was the ugliest. She refused to leave our house. She changed the locks. She sent me emails accusing me of emotional abuse for humiliating her family. But then came the court date for the asset division. I walked into the room. Jessica was there with her lawyer, a family friend who looked out of his depth. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes. She had lost weight. My lawyer Davis laid it all out. The spreadsheets, the receipts, the proof that I had paid 90% of the mortgage for 6 years. The proof that Jessica had secretly withdrawn $40,000 from our joint savings and wired it to Julian over the last 2 years. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for nonsense, looked at Jessica. Mrs. Mitchell-Exeter, the judge said, is this true? Did you transfer joint funds to a company now under federal indictment for fraud? I was investing, Jessica cried. It was a loan. He was going to pay us back double. It was theft, the judge said. You stole from your husband to fund a criminal enterprise. The gavel banged. I got the house. Or rather, I got the order to sell the house and keep 80% of the proceeds to recoup my losses. Jessica got her personal car and her credit card debt. She looked at me as we left the courtroom. "I hate you," she hissed. "You destroyed my family." "No, Jess," I said, feeling a strange sense of pity. "Your brother destroyed your family." I just turned on the lights. The months following the divorce were quiet. I moved into a sleek, modern apartment downtown. It was small, but it was mine. No throw pillows I wasn't allowed to touch. No passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. I went to work. Dr. Aris called me into his office the week after the news broke. I was terrified I was going to be fired for the drama. Instead, he shook my hand. "The board is impressed," he said. "You saved the pension fund millions. And you showed incredible integrity. That's the kind of man we want leading the defense contract." I got the promotion. My salary jumped to $185,000. Plus bonuses. I bought a new watch, an Omega, not because Julian told me to, but because I wanted to celebrate my own time. My time was mine now, but it wasn't all victory laps. I was lonely. You don't spend 8 years with someone and not feel the phantom limb when they're gone. I missed the idea of Jessica. I missed the future I thought we were building. I went to therapy. I realized that I had been a nice guy in the worst sense. I had allowed myself to be a doormat because I thought it would buy me love. I learned that boundaries aren't mean. They are necessary. One rainy Tuesday, 6 months after the party, I was at a bookstore. I was looking for a book on orbital mechanics. I reached for a title and another hand reached for it at the same time. I looked up. A woman with kind eyes and messy hair was smiling at me. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't think anyone else read this dry stuff." "I do," I smiled. "I'm Samuel." "I'm Audrey," she said. "I teach physics at the university." We got coffee. We talked for 3 hours. She didn't ask about my car. She didn't ask about my empire. She asked about the stars. She asked about the satellites. She listened. And when I told her about my job, her eyes didn't glaze over. They lit up. "That's heroic," she said. "Connecting people. That's beautiful." It was the first time in 6 years a woman had called my work beautiful. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice were grinding Julian into dust. Mr. Sterling did not forgive. He testified against Julian. He revealed emails where Julian had mocked the senile old man while stealing his money. Robert took a plea deal. He got 5 years for bank fraud, signing the false collateral documents. At 70 years old, 5 years is a life sentence. Julian went to trial. He tried to plead insanity. He tried to blame me. He tried to blame the economy. The jury didn't buy it. The sentencing hearing was a year after the dinner party. I didn't have to go, but I went. I needed closure. Audrey went with me. She held my hand as we sat in the back of the courtroom. Julian was brought in. He had lost his tan. His hair was thinning. He looked like a frightened child. The judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud. Securities fraud. Identity theft. 14 years. Federal prison. No parole for at least 12. Julian started crying. He looked back at the gallery. He saw Martha, who was sobbing into a handkerchief. He saw Jessica. Jessica was sitting alone. She looked older, harder. She was wearing a cheap suit. I heard she was working as a receptionist at a dental office now, living in a small apartment with 2 roommates. Julian's eyes scanned the room and locked on mine. For a second, I thought he would scream, but he just slumped. He looked defeated. He knew. He finally knew that the Honda Civic had run him off the road. As we walked out of the courthouse, Jessica intercepted us. She saw Audrey. She saw the way Audrey held my arm. She saw my new suit. Audrey helped me pick it out. It was navy blue, tailored, and very sharp. "Sam," she said. Her voice was small. "Jessica." I nodded. I just wanted to say." She looked at Audrey, then back at me. "I'm having a hard time, Sam. The rent is due. And with Dad in jail, Mom is a mess. She was asking for money. After everything, after the insults, the betrayal, the hatred, she still saw me as the ATM, the utility player. I looked at her. I felt nothing. No anger. No love. Just indifference. I'm sorry to hear that, Jess, I said. But that sounds like a problem for your family to solve. I'm not family anymore. Remember? You told me to leave your house. But Sam, please. She reached out. Come on, Sam, Audrey said softly, squeezing my hand. We have that reservation, right? I smiled at Audrey. Let's go. We walked away. I heard Jessica calling my name, but her voice faded into the noise of the city traffic. A few months later, I was cleaning out some old boxes that had been in storage. I found an old iPad of Jessica's that I had packed by mistake. Curiosity got the better of me. I turned it on. I knew the passcode. I opened her messages. I scrolled back to the dates before the party. I found a text thread with Julian. Julian, I need another transfer, Jess. The interest payment is due. Jessica, I can't, Jules. Sam is starting to ask about the savings. He's suspicious. Julian, just do it. Once the Sterling deal closes, I'll give you back double. You can finally leave that loser and we'll buy you a condo in the city. Jessica. Okay, sending it now. Just hurry up. I can't stand pretending to listen to his boring work stories anymore. I stared at the screen. She knew. She didn't know the extent of the fraud maybe, but she knew he was broke. She knew she was stealing from me, and she was planning to leave me the moment Julian hit it big. The guilt I had occasionally felt, that maybe I had been too harsh, maybe I had ruined her innocent life, evaporated instantly. I wasn't the villain. I was the escapee. 3 years have passed since that night. I am married to Audrey now. We have a small house in the hills, not a mansion, but it has a telescope on the back deck. We spend our weekends looking at the planets. I was promoted again. I'm now the director of operations. I drive a Tesla not to show off but because I like the tech. Last week, we were at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. It was our anniversary. I looked across the room and saw a woman clearing tables. She looked familiar. It was Emily, Liam's ex-wife. She looked exhausted. And sitting at a corner table, eating a small bowl of pasta, were Martha and Jessica. They looked like ghosts. Martha was frail. Jessica looked bitter, her face etched with deep lines of unhappiness. They weren't talking to each other. They were just eating, staring into space. I watched them for a moment. I thought about going over. I thought about saying something. But then Audrey laughed at something I said. Her laugh was warm and genuine. What are you looking at? Audrey asked. Nothing, I said, turning back to my beautiful wife. Just shadows. I realized then that the best revenge isn't anger. It isn't even justice, though seeing Julian in prison was satisfying. The best revenge is a life well lived. The best revenge is finding someone who loves you for who you are, not what you can provide. I took a sip of my wine. Tasted like freedom. Thank you for being patient and walking this road with me. You guys are amazing. Please hit that like button and comment number 1 below so I know you made it to the end. It not only helps more people find this story, but it tells me that my experience meant something to you. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing.
In your kitchen, and you could go to that QR code and find out other things that you could reduce. And then if you wanted to, we could send you another kit and you could see if your levels changed.
Okay.
You want to do that?
I would love to do that.
Yay!
What is phase 2?
Phase 2 would mail you back another kit.
Uh-huh.
You take your urine again, and that's it.
So that's to see if it's changed because of lifestyle changes.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So you would be doing what the couples part of what the couples in the intervention did. The couples in the intervention also were infertile. And so we're not going to touch your fertility question, but the men collected sperm, and we can do that if you want, but I don't think you may not want to talk about that on your That's what we did in the intervention. So in the intervention we found, this is what the intervention was. There's a company called Fellow, which is grown out of UCSF. And they're very big now. I think they have like 200,000 men in their files who have had their semen tested. Okay? And at the time they have their semen tested, they're asked, could we recontact you for research? That's one important question. And they're asked, why did you want your sperm tested? And if they say, because we're infertile or subfertile, or we're worrying about our fertility, we ask, or they ask, how long has it been that you've been having this problem with fertility? And if it's more than 12 months, then they're technically infertile.